friend, Professor Payal Nagpal, has given a kind of important outline of the plot and have also given us insights into the different characters, particularly Antigone, in the first part of the lecture. And now she'll be talking about, I hope, about the complexities that have been built into the plot and the structures of different characters. And I was struck in the first part by her description of the nurse, which is who is a new entry into it, and who would be then carrying perhaps the message, the opinion, and the perspective of the modern woman, and also that it's a nurse, it's a woman character to collaborate with the conception of Antigone that would carry us forward into our own life and times. So may I request Professor Payal Nagpal to tell us something more about the nurse, her significance, and what would be perhaps the aim of the writer in introducing this character in the play.
So actually the nurse remains a minor character, but there is this bit where there is a very detailed interaction between the nurse and Antigone. And I think it gives a certain depth of character to Antigone herself and makes us also see her in terms of, a kind of the maternal bond that the nurse has with Antigone. And that, I think, lends a certain breadth to Antigone's character. And this build-up is, I think, very important, because this build-up is very different from the Antigone of the classical plot. And I think that's where the role of the nurse becomes very important. So,
can I also ask you that, in the original play, perhaps the mother figure is missed. And
yes.
Antigone has to fight her own battles,
yes.
Along with her brother's fate.
Yes.
So there is a family behind it, and the woman is not there. So who knows? Maybe the writer thought that some kind of a mother figure, as you pointed out earlier, was needed for the play to understand it in the modern context.
Yes, I think it gives a certain rootedness to Antigone. Her. Just her presence there, I think it gives a certain rootedness to her. And that's why I thought this was very, very interesting. Again, the reaction of Ismene is very, very important here, where she says that, she does not want to die. And what Antigone says is interesting. She says, I prefer not to die myself. Given a choice, she's being very upfront about it, that if given a choice, who wants to die? Nobody wants to die. So Ismene says that, I sort of see what Uncle Creon means. And Ismene, in a sense, wants to toe the line, and she wants to, it's not as if it's going to make any difference by giving this burial. So Antigone says that, I don't want to sort of see anything. Now this, to sort of understand is also Ismene's way of accepting Creon's decree, whereas Antigone does not want to, accept that decree, and she wants to assert herself and fight for her dignity. So Ismene says, Uncle Creon is the king, he has to set an example. And Antigone says something very interesting. She says, but I am not the king, and I don't have to set people examples. So she's performing her role as somebody who is, Polynice's sister. She is performing the role of, an ordinary person, of not being the king. And if Creon has to do it, then that is something that belongs to Creon, and that's his discretion. But Antigone does not have to be part of that decision. So, and here we see a very, very distinct difference between Ismene and Antigone in terms of their decisions vis-a-vis Polynice's burial. And Ismene is very scared, in a sense, of the power that the king represents. She has completely internalized that fear. And, there is a point in the play where she almost feels as if, his mob will come running and we shall suffer. And, the fact that they will feel the pain. And she feels that, she cannot go against Creon's decision for this reason. So in this sense, Ismene and Antigone represent two very different perspectives. Now, what is very interesting here is that these two perspectives are also two ways of responding to something. Now, I think the play raises a very important question. The important question of, it could be vis-a-vis the occupation. Do you go along with the collaboration, or do you resist it? I think Anouilh's strength lies in presenting that conflict. So, on the one hand, is someone who has, completely internalized the entire structure of power and is not willing to, do anything outside of it. And on the other hand, is Antigone, who will not compromise on her dignity, on her integrity. In fact, she snubs Ismene and says, "No, for heaven's sake, don't paw me and don't let us start sniveling. You say you've thought it all out? The howling mob, the torture, the fear of death, they have made up your mind for you. Is that it?" Right? So this fear of the system, this fear of the powers that be, determine the decisions, the two different decisions that are taken by Antigone and Ismene. And they also speak about the two different possibilities that would have been there in the 1940s, amongst, of course, other possibilities. Another very important section here is the interaction between Haemon and Antigone. So Antigone is betrothed to Haemon, and what we have here is significant because, like the nurse in the scene, here Antigone appears as a modern woman who has desires, who has compassion, who wants to, express her emotions, her feelings. And so, as I said, that, I think Anouilh presents her as a very well-rounded character. The difference that is brought out between Antigone and Ismene is important also in terms of the kind of the two different roles and molds, that are presented vis-a-vis the women themselves. So, how Antigone actually does not fit into the mold of the conventional woman, and she is probably indicative of the role of the new woman who belongs to, the 1940s. So she asks him and asks him that, she says that, are you sure that you did not like Ismene, and, that you really do like me? So she says that I'm sallow and I'm scrawny. Ismene is pink and golden. She's like a fruit. So Ismene is shown to be, the conventionally, beautiful looking woman, whereas she says Antigone presents herself as sallow and scrawny. So this difference is indicative of how Antigone, it's not only about the physical appearance, but it's also about, the two being two very different types of women. So this characterization is very interesting here, and I think it tells us about how Antigone is belongs more to her times in that sense. She also goes specially to meet him and tells him that there is a reason why she had come to meet him, and says that I wanted to be your wife last night because I love you that way very strongly. And this expression of emotion, this expression of desire, is something that we see in Anouilh's play. And this is, not evident in the original Sophoclean plot. And with this, I think our understanding of Antigone is going to be very different. So, this is a different play in that sense. As Professor Prakash rightly pointed out, the reworking, of the classical plot. We have a very different Antigone. Using that classical plot, Anouilh is able to create for the readers and the audience an Antigone that they will be able to relate to. And this is a very, very important takeaway point. So here I think now I would like to ask Professor Prakash what he thinks about this new Antigone that Anouilh presents to his readers and audience.
No, the way you have interpreted the play has put a kind of extra significance to the character of Antigone. I remember, I was teaching Antigone by Sophocles to the classes about 40 years ago. And then, we discussed that old Greek classic as a kind of clash between Creon on one side and Antigone on the other. And Creon was supposed to be a tragic figure, somebody who didn't know how to go about it. And in the play that Antigone is in the hands of Jean Anouilh, the focus seems to be entirely on the woman who is Antigone. So would you agree with that?
Actually, I think he's presenting a different kind of character, in Antigone, because he also dwells in the same detail on Creon.
Oh.
And in fact, that is what I'm going to be discussing next, that Creon's characterization is also very different here. And I think it's this particular characterization of Creon that probably led the critics to have very, very divided views on this particular play. So,
because there is a kind of clash between passions on one side, loyalty on that side, and authority on the other. And authority for the Greeks might have meant a kind of social order, social stability. And that Creon was performing his role as a king, whereas she was playing the role of the rebel.
Right.
So that's how we interpreted the old classic. But this seems to be closer to the experiential woman in the 20th century, and as you point out so quite significantly, that Antigone here is not just a sister, not just a rebel, but also a woman.
Yes, I think her role as woman is very well brought out here. So, if we really look at this, when Creon, if we talk about Creon's character, so he says, who could have dared, as in who could have dared to, give a burial to Polynices and have gone against his decree. So the chorus and, but before I move on to that point, there is also a discussion about how this play is also an exposition of Anouilh's views on tragedy. I think that is important for us to understand Creon's character. So, there is this statement about tragedy. Tragedy is clean. It is restful. It is flawless. It has nothing to do with melodrama. With wicked villains, persecuted maidens, avengers, sudden revelations, and 11th hour repentances. Death in a melodrama is really horrible because it is never inevitable. In a tragedy, nothing is in doubt and everyone's destiny is known. Because there is, the plot is already there. And if we look at it, the play bears out this definition of tragedy, because right at the beginning the chorus has already told us that if your name is Antigone, then there is only one end that you can meet. So everybody's destiny is already known. That makes for tranquility. And he distinguishes it with melodrama by saying, in melodrama you argue, you struggle in the hope of escape, and he sees this as vulgar. But in tragedy, where there is not temptation to try to escape, argument is gratuitous, it is kingly. So there is great grandeur, there is great honor in that sense in tragedy, and which he says is very, very different from melodrama. Now, looked at in this way, we also understand that in Anouilh's definition of tragedy, there is no space for melodrama. And this is where the interaction between Creon and Antigone becomes very important. We have to ask, if Antigone is presented as this woman who's, taken from this classical plot, the plot remains the same. But yet, in spite of all this, Anouilh is able to present her as a woman in her own right. And in fact, there are various interpretations to this. For instance, some critics have felt that in the classical plot, she's doing it for the family. And here, however, Antigone is doing it more. She says, I'm doing it for myself. That sense of dignity of self is very important here. So this understanding of tragedy, that makes for tranquility, as is said by the chorus, is very, very significant. So, Creon, indicates that Antigone carries the pride of her father, Oedipus, and even asks her if she believes in, what he calls all that flummery about religious burial. He says, what are you going to achieve? I mean, really speaking, it does not matter if Polynices is not given a proper burial. So he actually asks Antigone, he says, you seriously don't believe all that flummery about religious burial. But Antigone asserts herself there, and she says that she is not doing this for anybody else. and says that for nobody, for myself. And Creon's, argument here is very, very important, because this is where, as we were just discussing, that this is probably what led to a very divided view on, the politics of the play. So Creon says, you listen to me. You have cast me for the villain in this little play of yours, and yourself for the heroine. And you know it, you damned little mischief maker. So now, what can Creon do? Because in this particular plot, he is going to be the villain. So is there a possibility of creating that little space for understanding what Creon is doing, and to then decide whether one goes along with Creon's argument or no? So what he does here is, what is brought into this play is a description of Polynices. And Polynices is presented as somebody who does not have any attributes. And there is an Antigone almost, in a sense, concedes to it. So the play raises a new question. Does someone who has not been good, does that person not have the right to a burial? The right to live, the right to die, and to be buried with dignity? So should that person not be given that right? And in the modern world, this is a very important question that Anouilh is raising. Because, the two brothers, Eteocles and Polynices, are presented as brothers who are also kind of, not very nice to the sisters. And if you, take a look at this exchange between Creon and Antigone, Creon says, I imagine that they tormented you, pulled your pigtails, broke your dolls, whispered secrets to each others to put you in a rage. Antigone does not deny this, but she says they were big and I was little. So, on the one hand, there is acceptance of this kind of behavior, and on the other hand, there is an understanding of the same. But what Antigone is saying here, her decision that she is not doing this for family, but is doing this for herself, for a sense of dignity, raises that question about to live with dignity and to also die and be buried with dignity. So the play with this, by bringing in this particular change, this twist, I think, in, going back into the characterization of Eteocles and Polynices, I think that changes a lot of things over here. And again, I'd like to ask Professor Prakash about what he thinks about this kind of change.
I think this change, as you have pointed out, is regarding the 20th century. In the 20th century, when the writer is writing this play, then he is surrounded by philosophies such as existentialism. There is Sartre is around, Camus is around, and he is addressing not merely himself, but also the self of the character inside it. So, as you have said it, and I totally agree with you, that there is a kind of selfhood in Antigone, which is not there in the old classic. There, it was a political play of the apparent kind. Now, here the politics is further, expanded into the common people who also have a kind of selfhood and dignity, as you say, and therefore it enlarges the scope of the tragedy that was in the hands of Sophocles in the ancient period. So there it was just, a kind of question of family, a question of heritage, the question of old morality, and gods, becoming directly or indirectly active in the world that the writer has talked about. So here, it's not gods. It is also not that kind of authority which has a total, control over the proceedings of life. But there are characters important in their own way, and Antigone represents them. And Creon also presents a point of view that is partly authoritarian and partly human. So I think it's a play that adds a new dimension to the old myth, and the myth is unfolded, unraveled, and it is made relevant to the time in which the writer is active.
I completely agree, and I think there is this poise, there is this calmness, and a great sense of conviction in her decision. I think in the case of Antigone. So even though Creon takes her through these instances of her childhood, and tries to trap her within this narrative so that she does not go ahead and repeat this act of the burial, because Creon gives her a chance and he says that, well, nobody knows about it, so you can just forget about this and go and get happily married to Himon. And he says that what he had done, and this is interesting because Creon defends his own act and says that, well, he's the ruler, he had to do something. So in fact, he says, what else could I have done? I had to make a martyr of one of them. So he decided to make Eteocles the martyr, and he decided to make Polynices the traitor. And but Antigone does not fall for his scheme of things. So even though he goes along talking about the brothers in a certain manner, Antigone thinks about a very tender paper flower that the Polynices had given her. And so she completely rejects Creon's paradigm. And like she had earlier told Ismene that, if there is something that he had to do as king, then that is his problem. It is not Antigone's. And so when he asks her to be happily married to Himon, Antigone completely vociferously rejects it and says that, I spit on your happiness, I spit on your idea of life. You with your promise of a humdrum happiness, provided a person doesn't ask too much of life. I want everything of life, and I want it now. In fact, Creon here, he brings in the whole Oedipal cycle and says that, scream on, daughter of Oedipus, scream on, in your father's own voice. And she says, yes, we are of the tribe that asks questions, and we ask them to the bitter end. So, there might have been, and this is again, the divided reception is what comes to mind, that, there could be a reason for collaboration, but where does the voice of dignity lie? And through Antigone's decision, through these lines that we are of the tribe that asks questions and we ask them to the bitter end, there can be no doubt about the fact that Anouilh is presenting a play that is totally true to its times. And it is this, it's almost like asking, which side are you on? So there is, of course, no Tiresias in the play, and, the whole idea of, looking ahead is based more on, I think, Antigone's own decision about this than
Professor
anything
Payal
else.
Nagpal, would you say that the play ends with a kind of resolution of the question that was raised, or that it's an open-ended play?
So, where I think the play, in terms of the plot, follows the classical line, and of course, Antigone commits, she hangs herself, she commits suicide, and you have Himon again who kills himself, and the Himon's mother also, kills herself, and we only have Creon who's left with his decision. And if we talk about the end of the play, the chorus has something very interesting to say here. There is a bit about the guards here. The guards are also figured as important characters. All those who were meant to die have died, all dead, stiff, useless, rotting. And those who have survived will now begin quietly to forget the dead. They won't remember who was who or which was which. It is all over. Antigone is calm tonight, and we shall never know the name of the fever that consumed her. She played her part. Creon can now begin to wait for his own death. Only the guards are left, and none of this matters to them. Now, the reason I shared these lines is that what we started with, that the play works for us at many levels. So the play works for us at the level of it being a style of drama that belongs to the 1940s. And the chorus and the lines here, this restoration of dignity, not just to Polynices, but Antigone herself, that she is calm, which she is not in the classical
play. This problem of a set play, of a play that has a kind of decisiveness about it, called Antigone of Sophocles, that play seems to be viewed by the modern day audience. So the plot line will remain in Antigone's plot line.
Yes.
But then the questions that are raised through the play, they might touch the audience also.
Which is why I think what the chorus is reinforcing here is that Antigone is calm at more than one level. She's of course no longer there, but is calm about the fact that she was able to execute her decision, and now Creon has to wait for his death. At the same time, I think the projection of the guards here is very interesting. Because there is a scene where Antigone wants to leave a letter for Himon, and the guard is trying to write that letter. So all this is of course different, but the guards are left, and none of this matters to them. So here is a new group of people in society, and they are unaffected by this. I think there is an oblique projection that Anouilh is making about a totally different group of people in society.
I call you a Brecht expert, and this seems to be Brechtian in that sense,
Yes.
that there's a line drawn between, line of distinction drawn between the audience and the play. And that happens at the level of Antigone, dying at the end, but then the audience is kept wondering all the time.
Yes, the audience is kept there, and also to say that, well, all those people who had to die as per the original plot, they are all dead now. And, those who had to survive, they have all survived. So this also kind of, I'm just thinking of it in terms of performance, that the intensity of the last part is completely undercut. And, in a sense, the chorus almost, placates the audience by saying these lines that, they won't remember anything now.
This is Brechtian.
So this is totally Brechtian. And so though, they won't remember who was who, which was which, it is all over. In a sense that, that the idea was to make the plot reach its end, and that has been achieved.
In one sentence, tell us the message of the play.
I think Anouilh's Antigone asks us to think about what it means to treat human life with dignity. And that is a very, very important, should have been a burning question of the 1940s about human dignity. And the play is able to execute that using a completely, what I would certainly call a Brechtian style.
So friends, we come to the end of the discussion about Jean Anouilh and his play Antigone in particular. But as you know, Professor Nagpal also has widened the scope of the play and brought in the 20th century specifically and in the context of the dramatic tradition in which Jean Anouilh also worked. So I hope you have enjoyed the lecture, and the points made are relevant more to the audience today than they would be to the original playwright being written for the ancient period. And the gap actually is a problematic that Professor Payal Nagpal has emphasized. Thank you.